Welcome to Close Up Radio, where our hosts, Doug Llewellyn and Jim Masters, bring you the amazing stories of people who answered the call to unlock their potential and taken control of their own success with authenticity, creativity, persistence, and resilience. Close Up Radio special guests share their knowledge and wisdom so you, the listener, can live the most empowered life possible. Close Up Radio. And now, here's today's host, Jim Masters.
Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. We're excited to have you here with us, as we always do. And sports energy expert Dr. Eric Leskowitz is joining us from Buckland, Massachusetts. Pleasure to have him here on the show as well. In The Joy of Sox, Weird Science and the Power of Intention, psychiatrist Dr. Eric Leskowitz explores how the principles of energy medicine and intentional research explain the intangibles in sports. The whole idea of energy, he says, really came to life for him through sports, particularly through his lifelong love of the Boston Red Sox, and more specifically, the 2004 World Series. The Joy of Sox starts by laying a foundation of scientific evidence in support of these mysterious forces. Dr. Leskowitz interviews ball players and fans and scientists and other fans, a series of energy exercises that show fans how to maximize their team's performance by truly tapping into their own heartfelt enthusiasm and transmitting it most effectively to their team. It's really fascinating work that he is doing. It lays down that information. He has studied energy healing, meditation, hypnosis for over 40 years, and he believes energy is the missing ingredient in Western medicine and has used these techniques in his work with chronic pain patients. He says it was an eye-opener for him the first time he let somebody do energy work on him. The scientific method really is all about being a skeptic, but now he had personal experiences that showed him something else was going on. He says when you're in the zone as an athlete, amazing things happen, but you can also be in the zone as a fan and be totally attuned. It's a shared energetic experience. He also has worked with coaches and sports psychologists to use energy techniques to really get into the zone of peak performance. Every other health system in the world has some form of invisible healing energy. Western medicine is finally catching up, since we've been so focused on what we can observe and measure that we've been missing the intangibles, and that's a key word in sports. It's also a key word in health. Now, if you'd like to see the documentary, The Joy of Sox, the movie, you can see it by going to www.thejoyofsox, that's S-O-X, as in Red Sox, thejoyofsoxmovie.com, or you can visit YouTube. And The Joy of Sox, Weird Science and the Power of Intention, Sports, Spirituality, and Science Come Together at the Old Ballpark is available on Amazon as well. Also, if you'd like information, we'll mention this again, but if you'd like more information on energy psychology and sports, you can visit energypsych.org and Evolutionary Sports Collaborative at evosportscollective.com. Without further ado, let's welcome the doctor to the show to talk about this fascinating topic and much more on this episode of Close Up Radio. Dr. Leskowitz, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Early on, I always like to ask the guests about things that have inspired them in their life's journey that kind of pointed them in the direction of doing what they do now, which tends to be work that serves others in a really impactful and inspiring way. For you, what were some of those moments and experiences that inspired you to realize you wanted to help people, you wanted to inspire people, thus leading to writing this book and making this movie?
Well, that's a big question. I guess I've grew up in a family that was always focused on helping other people and considering the underdog. So I happened to be good at science. So healthcare, being a doctor, was always part of the picture. But I think the most important thing that I did in my development was actually something I didn't do. I took some time off between college and medical school and did some traveling to Europe and Middle East and I met my wife there, and we traveled to India, and it was a real eye-opener, basically showing that different people do things differently, and we don't have the answers to everything. So when I came back to medical school, I had a bigger perspective. I actually learned how to meditate just before starting medical school. And I was doing it as a stress management tool, not a spiritual practice, but I was really impressed by what a dramatic effect it could have on just how I felt. And this was back in the mid to late 70s. So in class, I would always say, wouldn't meditation help this disease or that disease? And, of course, there was no literature at the time, so I got a lot of crazy looks. It's changed a lot in 40 years, and thanks to science, there's a lot of research that documents the effectiveness of meditation. But that also opened the door to, when my mind was quieter, I could experience subtle things happening in my body, and these were energy-type experiences through yoga and practices like that. But I think the key crossroads for me was when a friend invited me to a talk by an energy healer. Those were kind of loaded buzzwords for me, and I was very hesitant, but my friend Richard had good credibility in my eyes, so I went. This was a talk by Reverend Rosalind Briere, and she really literally opened my eyes because she talked about the invisible energies that are behind all of the physical imbalances that show up as illness. And just because we can't measure it and weigh it doesn't mean it's not real. So she taught how to manipulate energy. It's an offshoot of what yoga does and Tai Chi does and acupuncture does, but using the energy of her body and her hands. And oh my goodness, it was just an eye opener. So that's colored my practice ever since. I went into pain management because Western medicine doesn't work. We just throw medicines and injections at people, but don't get to the underlying cause or imbalance. I was at Spalding Rehab for many years, and we taught people how to manage their pain apart from medicines, and that involved things like self-regulation through biofeedback and meditation, but also energy practices. And that was really the key moment when I started using energy practices with chronic pain patients, and dramatic things would happen. So that was sort of one track in my life. At the same time, I've been a sports fan ever since, we moved to Boston when I was 2, and I guess it starts then for everybody in the area. And as you mentioned, when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2004, it was very unexpected and very exciting, and everybody got into it. And that was what really impressed me. It was a great antidepressant for my patients, for one thing, but just the group collective involvement in the Red Sox, even for fans who weren't able to attend the games. That was very striking. So that got me really interested in the group energy part of it. I wrote a few essays about it and got something into the newspaper about the subtle energy aspects of sports. But it really took off when my cousin, the filmmaker, suggested we do a movie to tell the story. And fortunately, the Red Sox organization was very supportive and helpful and let us come to Fenway and interview players and film at the park. And we put together a lot of fascinating stories, not just the players talking about what it's like to be in the zone, but the fans' sense of the fan energy and what it is. And we even did a couple of science experiments to find ways to measure these group energies. And people can watch the clips. I just want to update something you said. Going on YouTube is where you can find the movie to watch, the Joy of Sox movie. So if you go to YouTube and click the Joy of Sox movie, you can watch either the entire 60-minute movie or these clips of the 2 experiments we did. And they're pretty cool, actually. They showed that in one of them, I was literally the guinea pig. I was being monitored for my heart rate and the rhythms while I was in a relaxed state. I was blindfolded and my ears were plugged up, so I had no sensory input. But at a point unknown to me, a group of meditators came in and did this special heart-centered meditation that they know from practice gets them into the flow state. And the question was, would it have any impact on me? It was they didn't say anything or move anyway. They just changed their focus to the relaxation in their heart center. And lo and behold, the monitors showed me entering into this state called heart coherence just by being near them. So something was in the air, literally something was in the air. It might have been electromagnetic fields because the heart is like a magnet and does emit a big field. So we could have all been entrained, is the word, just like tuning forks. If you've ever played around with tuning forks, they don't have to touch each other, but they can influence each other across big distances. So I think people are like tuning forks, and it sort of depends what frequency you set yourself at. And crowd energy can be powerful in a negative way, and it can be very powerful in a positive way. So the upshot of my work, I hope, is to show that by focusing on some of the highest aspirations as a group, as a collective, we can have more enjoyment in sports and just life in general. And especially now, there's so much polarization and conflict that it's not us against them. We're all in this together.
Very, very true, yes. No truer words have been spoken, especially, in recent times. Sports itself has become so mathematical, and the people who run it, some might say, care really a lot about the statistics and advanced analytics. Of course, when we were kids and you went to the ballpark and you had your hot dog and you were rooting the home team, you didn't necessarily study the mathematical part. You went for the enjoyment, the experience, the atmosphere, the camaraderie, cheering that home team, looking at the stadium, just the whole experience. The team chemistry, too, seeing how the players played off each other and helped one another to really, try to win. Trusting what your eyeballs are showing you is very important as well. In terms of everything becoming very, very analytical and mathematical, what are your views on that?
Well, I think you can have too much of a good thing. I agree with what you described, that there's a role to play to, know what someone's batting average is or earned run average. But when you get into some of these newer analytics, I'm a nerd, a number nerd, and I can't even follow what wins above replacement or all that is. And I think you lose. Every week, if you watch sports on TV, you'll see examples of coaches doing something by the numbers that your eyeballs are telling you that's the wrong move to make. So it's a question of finding a balance. And I think, not to generalize, but I think our society as a whole is getting so digitalized and computerized that we lose track with everyday reality. It's not virtual. We have to be grounded in our body to experience these things more fully. Whether you're an athlete or a fan or a musician, or there's so many examples of team chemistry, like in music. I've just been watching, my wife and I have been watching the documentary on the Beatles, Get Back, and their chemistry had, ups and downs, but when they were in sync, it's amazing. They're in the zone as a group. Usually talk about one person being in the zone, but that's an example of a group of performers getting in the zone together. And, it's well known in the world of music. They're in the groove or in sync or however you want to call it. But this was just a very vivid example right here and now. And they didn't calculate out anything. They trusted that inner inspiration, I guess is what you would call it. They were inspired, and their music has lived on for 50 years already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So sometimes the actual experience itself, it's so enriching that we don't want to erase it because it's the feeling. You want to feel it as much as you experience it. You want to feel it. You feel energy in a sports arena. It's very profound. You have 50,000 people all around. Some of the communal experiences are happening right there before you. And you discuss that in the book, right?
Yeah. There's a great quote from one of the fans that we interviewed. He said, "You can be deaf, you can be blind, and you can still feel it," because it's that kind of palpable energy. And it's not just for sports fans or people who go to concerts. From Woodstock on, there's just an incredible group vibe, and it's not always been measured, but people who experience it can feel it, or political events. You go to a political rally and you can feel it. Meditation retreats, for example, that's silent but powerful. So that it operates on different levels, but it's always with this common denominator of resonance or coherence that connects people. And there's even some work that shows you don't even have to be physically present to participate in those kind of processes. It's very strange, but there's several different research groups that are finding ways to measure intention or human thought at a distance. It's very much like science fiction, that the human mind and the thoughts can influence physical events out in the world that we usually think we're separate from. But there was stuff done at Princeton University. They had a engineering lab that researched it. There's a Institute of Noetic Science on the West Coast that's can the mind affect the path of laser beams. It's like Star Trek, but we're getting there. So it's hard to know how it all ends, but I think it's unlimited potential is what it really comes down to.
Artificial intelligence and a whole bunch of things coming into play in so many different arenas and aspects of life. When we're talking about that communal experience, like being in a movie theater and watching that Titanic sink and feeling very similar emotions at the same time, it's really the energy of community, right? A great concert feels intimate no matter how many people are there. A movie in a movie theater, whatever it may be. Obviously, the last 2 years, some of that has been removed from our day-to-day with the COVID situation. What are your thoughts about that as far as how the lack of that ability to get together has played on things in a really interesting way as far as how we are operating? I know people personally who've said because they've been out of the cycle for so long. I went to see a nurse, actually, for an eye appointment, and the nurse had a mask on, which was perfectly terrific. But at the same time, she said she even found it interesting to have to cycle back into, there was an adjustment cycling back into community and almost being around people again.
Yeah.
Adjustment she had to go through.
Yeah. No, it's a great question, Jim, and it might be in some ways the most important aspect of the whole COVID thing. I mean, viruses, we know how to boost our immunity so that we can be more resilient and resistant to viruses. But this whole social disconnection is new and unprecedented, and I think it's going to take a while to bounce back from. That life is more than a Zoom call with people, and something different happens when you're physically with them. Sports has been a common way for people to get together, whether it's playing or rooting, and it was a very weird. There was at least a year or so where there were no fans in the stadiums, and they were still playing games, and the players talked about how strange it was, and performance was affected. There was not the home team advantage anymore that people had come to count on. So I think it's encouraging that you have to find a balance between gathering together safely, but the benefits of these communal events, I think outweigh. We're hearing a lot about loneliness and depression and substance abuse and overdose deaths rising dramatically this last year or two. So I think people need to be connected, and community is a really important piece of being a human being. And so finding the balance point is the key. And, sports can do it. There are many ways to find your, not just connection with others, but alignment with yourself. That's a big piece of it too, because if you watch too much TV, your blood pressure goes up 20 points just by watching the news, because it's all about negative stuff to worry about and be mad about and feel helpless about. So I think it's really important for people to take the reins in their own health and find their own ways of getting body, mind, and spirit into alignment. I don't mean to be in the zone every day, all day, but it's if you have a practice that helps you get there, by all means do it. And that's where sports can can lead the way, because there are a lot of athletes and coaches and sports psychologists whose practices for peak performance can also help just in everyday life and help people to weather the storm of the whole COVID stress. So you mentioned a couple of the websites that are helpful. That the Evolutionary Sports Collaborative, they have a lot of sports coaches who use spiritually oriented techniques for their athletes, and it's everything from tennis, like one fellow named Scott Ford. He teaches how to be in flow states by choice, not by chance, so that it's not just some random thing that happens. It's how to get there and stay there, whether you're on the tennis court or not. Another guy who his work really should be better known, Greg Warburton, was a sports psychologist for the Oregon State University NCAA champion baseball team for many years, and they won, I don't even remember whether it was 6 titles or something like that. And he taught people how to get into alignment by tapping their own acupuncture points and doing some affirmations. And he had phenomenal results. That doesn't just apply to baseball. There's the whole field of energy psychology, it's called, that gives people tools to manage stress in any situation by balancing their own energy. And that's where the organization, the Association for Comprehensive Energy Psychology, is a big player in the field, and they're at that energypsych.org website for, everything from scientific studies to practical training programs. So I'm really impressed with some of the tools that are out there. And sports is a good way to talk about it, a good way to introduce it to people. In fact, one of the grandfathers of the field, the person who popularized the term the zone, is a California guy named Michael Murphy, who wrote a book called The Zone, Transcendent Experience in Sports. He wrote about 45 years ago, and his kind of overall metaphor is that, it sounds strange, but he said sport is the yoga of the West. And what he meant by that was people can reach the same kind of spiritual heights of unity consciousness through sports as they can through yoga and meditation. We just never think of it that way. But his work has followed that thread, and what is it now? 45 years later, it's really taken root in so many different arenas. So that's a great book if people aren't familiar with it, because he interviews a lot of athletes who had like what we would call psychic experiences while playing. That they know what the opponent is going to do, or they can see what's happening behind them, and things like that aren't part of our ordinary experience. But when they get into this flow state, their other senses, extrasensory senses, kick in, and it's talked about in the yoga traditions. And these athletes were describing it even though they knew nothing about yoga. So the human consciousness is really a field of infinite potential.
It really, really is, and it's so fascinating. It's tremendously fascinating the more we learn about it. We've had a lot of energy practitioners on close-up television, radio over the years, and the realization of the last 20 years is the idea of this, complex as we are physically, there's something else that's going on. Our mind obviously affects our health in ways that we're still learning about. We can't just look at the physical health. The mind and keeping the mind healthy is just as important, right?
Oh, yeah, and that's really another sign of how much progress we've made, because, as I mentioned before, when I was in medical school, it was a weird thought to think that your emotions could affect your health, or your thoughts could affect your health, or even that stress could affect your health. Hans Selye was the researcher who first began to show that stress is a big factor. And now we know about what they call psychoneuroimmunology, that your immune system is affected by stress. To cycle back to COVID for a minute, that people's immune systems are enhanced. They're more resistant to viruses if they do some kind of stress management technique, if they find a way to get into the flow. And that can be, it doesn't have to be some methodical practice. It could just be going for a walk in the woods or taking the dog for a walk every morning or something like that. Something that you enjoy doing. That's a key emotion. So, yeah, I think it's now part of standard medical school training to learn about the mind-body connection. Now, Harvard Medical School actually has a course for first-year students where they learn how to meditate. So every new doctor graduating from Harvard has learned how to meditate, which it's like mind-blowing for me to think about because it was such a weird thing to do back 40 years ago, and now it's taken root. So I have to give John Kabat-Zinn a lot of credit for that. I went to medical school at UMass in Worcester, Massachusetts, and that's where John was just getting started with mindfulness as a sort of a sideline, and he found a way to get it into clinical practice. And they now have a Center for Mindfulness in Society, in mindfulness and meditation in society at UMass, and it's really spawned a whole generation of research. So a lot of really amazing positive things are happening now. At the same time that in the world a lot of amazing negative things are happening. So it's a really unusual time where, if you want to be metaphorical about it, the light is shining brighter than ever and the shadows are darker than ever. So, how it turns out, I don't really know, but I think the more people who just, follow their light and do the things that they feel most aligned with, get in the zone, that has a resonance effect on everybody. And I think, not to be preachy, but, watching too much TV news really can be damaging to your health. And it used to be, when I don't see patients anymore, but when I used to see patients, insomnia was a very common complaint. And the two most common things I recommended were not sleeping pills, but don't have any coffee after dinner and don't watch TV news at night. And it made a big difference. Yeah. So, yeah, the mind has a huge influence on our health.
Absolutely. We only have about a minute and a half left. I can't believe how quickly this has gone. You started meditating before you even went to medical school, right?
I did. Just to follow up on your comment, the time has gone quickly because we were both in the zone. You lose track of time when you're in the zone, and you don't. And time just flows. Yeah, I did learn back then, and I'm really, really glad that I did. It really helped give me some perspective, and I've gotten more into what you would call the spiritual aspect as I've matured and gotten older. But it was in England they call it the thin end of the wedge. It's like I like to joke that meditation was my gateway drug into a multi-dimensional view of health, because once you have some of these experiences, you can't go back. And whether it's meditating or having someone do a Reiki session on you or whatever, or an acupuncture treatment, it's real and it's here to stay. So I hope people trust their experiences when some of the listeners venture out into those realms. And just because some doctors are skeptical, there are others who are pursuing it and finding scientific proof that this stuff is real. And so I think that's the way to go.
Absolutely, yeah. Fascinating work you're doing, Doctor, and tying in the sports element and understanding in the way that you do. Congratulations on all the Joy of Sox movie. Folks can again see that at YouTube. The Joy of Sox, Weird Science, and the Power of Intention, Sports, Spirituality, and Science come together at the Old Ballpark, available at Amazon. And, of course, they can go to energypsych.org to learn more about energy psychology and sports, Evolutionary Sports Collaborative, Evo Sports Collective, that is, .com. And, yeah, this is really amazing. I wish you continued success, and I hope we get a chance to maybe explore some more, maybe hear some case studies down the line. That would be a pleasure as well. Thanks for joining us on the show.
Thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it.
You are very welcome. Keep up the amazing work that you're doing, inspiring and impacting lives in such an extraordinary way. A very special guest, sports energy expert, Dr. Eric Leskowitz. I'm your host, Jim Masters, thanking you for your time. This time till next time, right here on Close Up Radio. I invite you to stay tuned. I'll be back in less than 30 minutes with another amazing guest celebrated right here as well. Till then, for all of us, have a terrific day. Thanks for listening.